We can't hear him, Chair.
Sorry, you can't hear, but can you hear me?
We can hear you, Chair, but we can't hear him.
Yes, we hear you, Chair.
Morning, yeah, it's
Okay.
just coming. It's just coming now. It's on the screen. Right. There you are. Can you see it?
No, we can't see it, Mashile.
Okay. There it is. Right. There it is,
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you very much. Without taking up too much time, I want to recognize the various presentations that are going to be had. As you can see the list in front of you there, that is all we are taking time for today. You've sent us obviously specific submissions which members have been through. So may I request at this point, if there's a member who would like to move for the adoption of the agenda today, certainly from members who are on the platform. May I recognize a member who will move for the adoption of the agenda?
I move for adoption of the agenda, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Skedek. May I ask, is there a member who would like to second the agenda? Honorable Bateman, I recognize you.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Yes, good morning and to all my colleagues, and I second the adoption of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. With that in mind, I want to officially open this particular meeting. I want to raise that given the fact that this is the third version of the budget that has been presented, 95% of it has remained largely the same. The adjustments really speak to the revenue component and the revenue raising mechanisms in that regard. The adjustments equally so speak to some of the rate at which some of the increases were meant to take place relative to the reduction in the income stream that was meant to be put forward. I say that for all the people who are listening to us on this platform, that you need to be conscious of the fact, you know quite clearly that obviously some of the presentations have been heard before. So I want to make sure that we get right in terms of not having to repeat some of the content that was covered before. With that in mind, Mashile, may I ask, are there any agenda apologies for this meeting? There are many agendas, but I just need to know what apologies there are.
Thank you so much, Chair, and everybody on the platform. Good morning once again. We've received an apology from the Deputy Minister of Finance, Honorable Sarupen, who would not be able to join us. And the other apology was received from the Honorable Kaleka Masibuko. She will be joining us a little bit later, for she is engaged in another committee at the moment. Thank you so much, Chair.
Those apologies
I am present. I'm present now. Okay, I'm done on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Honorable Kaleka Masibuko. So that apology falls by aside. Are there any other apologies from any other member? With not being there.
From me, Chair. Okay, it's not an apology. I'm here, but I'm attending physically the P20 now. So I'll be in and out of this meeting. If they allow it, because I have them now, but I think they're going to ask me to take them off.
Honorable Siate, we recognize that. You don't need to state that as an apology. That is for you to communicate to your respective whip of your political party in this instance, if you're going to be in two meetings at the same time. So I just, for our purposes, you are here. I will assume you to be here. Let me, with that in mind, looking at the agenda, I see there's a request here that if we can request for the Rural Health Advocacy Project to then swap over, change to the agenda and request that the Rural Health Advocacy Project be flighted last. We can accommodate that at a later stage. Mashile, let's call, I think the first people to present this morning are section 27, if I'm not mistaken.
Can everyone hear me? Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, all members on the platform. My name is...
Okay, that's correct. Just in terms of section 27, may I ask, before you proceed, let me be clear. Your presentation is there. Please do keep in mind we have very strict time controls today. We've got a fairly full agenda today, and I'd like to keep this meeting moving as urgently as possible. So when you present, stick to the salient points. Members will ask a few questions, and then keep in mind that National Treasury will respond at the end. So everybody needs to remain in here. So if we can keep it salient and moving, I'm going to be strict on time. This is in some ways a repeat, and some other members have also had an opportunity to present before. So if I can just make as a standard rule across all the presentations today, we will go 10-15 minutes, and then that's it. Literally, members will take a few questions, and then we'll go. So please let me be urgent about that issue. Section 27, you are first up. You can proceed from there.
Good morning again, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. My name is Mtutuzi Nkosi. I'm a budget researcher at Section 27. I'll be giving the presentation for Section 27 today. May I ask if the presentation will be flighted, or can I flight it myself?
Yeah, you've been given the right to flight, my brother.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Can everyone else see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Good morning again, honorable members. Good morning, Chairperson. As I said, my name is Mtutuzi Nkosi. I'll be taking you through Section 27's presentation on this project. Quickly to start off about Section 27, for those who are not aware, we are a public law center that seeks to build capable education and healthcare systems that work for all South Africans. And our presentation will largely be centered around the health and education components. To begin with, we're happy that the third version of the budget, or budget 3.0 as it's been called, has retained a lot of the increases, as the Chairperson mentioned earlier, that we saw in the first and second iterations of the budget that did not pass. Most importantly, we're happy that this year's budget begins a reversal of years of budget cuts that have weakened both the education and healthcare systems, which has resulted in fewer doctors being hired, fewer nurses, and fewer teachers as well. So in our view, the context in which this budget is being presented is one where service delivery has worsened, especially in underserved communities. So the third, as I've said, the third iteration of the budget marks a shift from years of deep austerity. We're seeing a return to investments, a return to real investment in education and healthcare. For us, we're happy with the reversal in the bed hike, which is something that we're strongly against. We're also happy with the increases in the real increases, that is, after accounting for inflation, to basic education and healthcare, and the modest but meaningful improvements that we're seeing to the social wage in this budget. We are, however, concerned with the impact of the fuel levy increase on some public services, especially in education. The NSNP is one which we'll speak to later. We would also like to raise some concerns about the lack of fiscal buffers in this budget and reduced contingency reserve, which in our view is a risk to the fiscus and might affect us later. Given the current context where there's been discussions around ghost workers and wasteful expenditure, we also like to raise the issue of underspending and corruption in provincial departments and the need to strengthen capacity to ensure that provinces are able to deal with these issues in terms of consequence management and having enough capacity to monitor and hold governments accountable. Our key recommendations for this version of the budget is firstly is that we'd like the committee to take it up to itself to assess the impact of fuel levy, which has, in our view, has caused effects on the National School Nutrition Program and the Emergency Services, Medical Services Program in particular. Would like to call for a strengthening of the oversight of hiring and the maintenance of personnel to tackle the problem of ghost workers. We also like to call it upon the committee to play a role in reassessing the impact of cuts to healthcare infrastructure and emergency medical services spending, and an end to the practice of cutting real spending whenever grants are underspent by provinces. On gender responsive budgeting, we spoke at length about it in the first two presentations, so I'll not dwell much on it, except for the fact that we'd like to see the expansion of gender responsive budgeting beyond the pilot phase and going to include the education and healthcare sectors. When it comes to the provincial allocatable share, a lot of the increases that we saw in both the first and the second budgets are maintained. The PAS will increase by 33 billion for the year. However, we believe that the impact of the accruals of around 22 billion and inflation as well will dampen the impact of the increase to the PAS. We are seeing that provinces are facing increasing demands for services due to population growth and other factors, and believe that the increase will not have as much of an impact as we'd like to believe. On the underspending of conditional grants remains a key concern. It seems like that Treasury has responded to underspending of provincial conditional grants by reallocating the money to better performing provinces. We take issue with this practice. It punishes people in areas that are underserved. We believe that an alternative way of going about it would be rather to help the provinces that are underspending by strengthening their capacity and building capacity to ensure that they're able to spend the grants. On personnel funding, we're happy that this version of the budget maintains the above inflation increases that we saw in the first two budgets, including the 6.7 billion rand that is provisionally allocated to hiring healthcare staff. We hope that it is released and fully appropriated sooner than later, as the healthcare system urgently needs more workers. In this context, we'd also like to raise the issue of ghost workers. There was a recent report in Mpumalanga about 6.5 million rands being wasted on ghost workers. We like to raise it to the attention of the committee that this should be an urgent issue that demands the attention of government. Moving on to basic education expenditure, Budget 3.0 allocates 346 billion to the sector, which is 3 billion rands less than the Budget 2.0 allocations, but it's still a meaningful investment, a real investment in the sector. If well spent, this will go a long way towards addressing problems with teacher shortages, overcrowding, and infrastructure. We are, however, concerned by the continued prioritization of workbooks and LTSM. there's in this version of the budget, there's a 1.4% cut in real terms of the accounting for inflation. This will likely undermine provinces' ability to procure workbooks and LTSM and efforts to improve literacy and learning outcomes. When it comes to the IEG, which is the main way in which provinces fund infrastructure for schools, there's the changes to the allocations remain unchanged. There's a 4.9% real increase year on year on that front. We're happy with the allocation. However, we've noticed that in the past, despite the grant's strong performance, there's been reductions to it when in-year cuts and then cost containment is introduced. On the SIBG, the grant continues to receive real-term and nominal reductions to its allocation, chiefly because it's been underspent over the years. I would believe here that the solution, rather than cutting back on the grant, would be stronger oversight and accountability measures to ensure that it improves its performance. And we also like to note that with the upcoming merger of SIBG and IEG, we hope that the allocations levels remain the same after the fact. The biggest winner in this budget for us, for everyone, really, honorable members and chairperson, is ECD or Early Childhood Development. We're happy that the interests to this part have been maintained and have not been changed in budget 3.0. It will go a long way towards improving the sector. On NSNP, our main concern here is the fuel levy increase. It will likely have an impact on the allocation to NSNP as the provision of the program relies a lot on transport and food costs. So an increase to the fuel levy will likely mean that the cost of acquiring food and transporting food to schools will increase, thereby affecting the modest 1.2% real increase that we are seeing to the program this year. And unlike zero rating with that, there's no way that the fuel levy offers exemptions to programs like NSNP. Moving on to healthcare expenditure, we're seeing that there's a real investment to the sector after years of underinvestment and disinvestment. This is the first real-time increase we're seeing since 2021. However, we see that per healthcare user spending continues to decline, which is by 1.9% this year, which is a concern. We are happy that there's an increase in personnel allocations, which we hope will not go towards just wage adjustments, but will also be used for new hires, which are critically needed in the sector. When it comes to the district health programs grant, which funds HIV funding, HIV medication, mostly in the country, our main concern is that there's the cut that was in budget 1.0 and budget 2.0 is maintained, which is a cut in real terms of 3.1%. The sector what we've noticed in the sector is that there's been rising demand because of cuts to and US funding for HIV medication, which will put some very essential services at risk, and the delay by Treasury to provide emergency funding, which, as all indications go, will only be addressed in October, is an advocate, and will likely affect and bring disruptions to HIV medication services for a number of patients. We had hoped that they would take more proactive roles and that guaranteed funding would have been released earlier to ensure that there are not disruptions to HIV services. Honorable Chairperson, that is all we have from Section 27 for today. I'll now hand over to yourselves and members of the committee for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Are there any members who want to ask clarity-seeking questions? If there are members who would like to do so, you can indicate now if you can put your hand, and then we'll go from there. I'll recognize you. It is not mandatory, but if you've got some. Honorable Mkonto, I recognize you. Is there any other member? So, okay, Honorable Mkonto, let me hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity. Good morning, Chair, honorable members, our guests and colleagues. Chair, there is one point I want to check with the presenter, that they are talking about capacity building in the provincial departments. What is their take? Instead of capacity building, the government intensify consequence management, because we are 30 years in democracy, and all the policies that has to be implemented for budget expenditure have been there for years. And in many provinces, the people that are responsible for the budget are qualified, but they just choose, most of them, to engage in irregular, fruitless, overspending, underspending, and mere corruption. So I just want to know, Uguti, what is their take on that, to go both with capacity building and intensify on consequence management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mkonto. On that question, may I ask Section 27 to respond, and then we'll move to the next one.
Thank you, Honorable Member, for the question. So I think to answer your question, we agree with you that there's an urgent need to improve consequence management in provinces to ensure that corruption, mismanagement, and all that are dealt with. But for us, we believe that also improving consequence management systems is a form of capacity building. So if you improve the way in which provinces address issues of mismanagement and corruption and so forth when they arise, and make sure that there is a capacity for provinces to do that in the first place, you would be building capacity in the provinces. I hope that answers the honourable member's question. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I think, in part, as we phrase the report and the feedback that goes in terms of the division of revenue bill, that input and the work that committee is meant to do in terms of oversight will be articulated as such. So I want to thank you for the presentation, and I want to thank Section 27 for the work that you've been doing in this space. I think it's important work in our communities and in our cities, so I genuinely appreciate that. Honourable members, the one thing we needed to acknowledge was also an apology from Deputy Minister Sarupin, who was meant to join us here today. They sent their apology. I wanted to recognize that whilst we are in this meeting. Rural Health Advocacy Project have requested that we move them further down. So what I'm going to request next is for equal education to be able to go next, and then we'll then proceed to Y Capital as it was. So is equal education on the platform?
Yes, Chair, we are. Thank you so much.
Super. Your time will resume now. You've got a presentation, and then we can go from there.
Yes, Chair. Could I just ask, if possible, to please have my sharing enabled? I think I still don't have access currently.
Mashile, can you arrange that?
Yes, he's the co-host. It's been arranged. Can proceed.
Thank you very much. I'll just share shortly. I just want to start. Chair, can I please confirm that the presentation is visible?
It is. You can proceed.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Honourable Chairperson and Honourable Members. My name is Daniel Almadaf. I'm presenting to you on behalf of the Equal Education Law Centre. we have presented before, but for the purposes of clarity, we are a public interest law center that specializes in education law, and we engage in community lawyering by way of our nationwide walking clinic, our movement lawyering, and legal research and advocacy. Today, Chair, will be presenting on a very specific issue, which is the continued absence of funding for Grade R implementation. And I deeply appreciate the comment made at the beginning, Chair, about the fact that many of these discussions have been had previously. And you know, our presentation on Grade R, Chairs, is a particularly pertinent example of that. It is not anything particularly groundbreaking or new, and that's actually why we think it's especially important that we make this presentation, because the requests that we've made repeatedly, both to Treasury and Parliament, for clear and identifiable answers and plans for the funding of Grade R have remained, it seems, off the radar for concrete outcomes. And so in terms of a timeline of events, we have engaged with this process repeatedly. Last year's MTBPS, on which we made a presentation, contained no mention at all of Grade R funding. The budget that was never tabled, so that was the one in February, made no mention of Grade R. At the pre-budget breakfast briefing, when officials are questioned, there were descriptions of not funding Grade R as being a policy decision, which of course is not the case because it's a legislative obligation. And following this, the budget that was tabled but never passed also made no provision for Grade R. We made written and oral submissions to the National Assembly and to the NCOP, to the Select and Standing Committees, and in all of those, we specifically raised Grade R funding. We did originally see a very short initial response from Treasury, which was a response acknowledging that Grade R was an issue and funding was important, without any indication of what that funding would look like and when that would happen. And parliamentary debates then proceeded without mentioning Grade R. We've now got a second budget that's been tabled, again without Grade R funding. So we're making the submission again, and exactly as you very helpfully mentioned, Chair, this is not information that is new to anyone, and it's for that reason that we're questioning how this issue has consistently fallen off the parliamentary and it seems Treasury's radar for concrete outcomes. So this our timeline is exactly what I've just mentioned here, and we are again at the coming towards the debate stage of a second tabled budget, with no indication that there will be meaningful interrogation of the failure of each budget to fund what is a compulsory legislative mandate. We must contextualize as well, Chair, that there have been 3 decades of policy development. This is in addition to the recognition by the president that ECD funding, of course, Grade R forming a part of that, has come 3 decades too late. So none of this is a development that has been foisted on anyone at the last minute. None of this is a development that should come as any surprise to anyone. And as I'll mention later, Chair, this includes the costing that was provided years ago by the Department of Basic Education to the portfolio committees variously of Parliament. And in addition, none of these are obligations or mandates which are foreign to the manifestos of the parties which are represented in this committee. We are very happy and pleased to have seen that basic education, and by some parties in this represented in this committee, specifically early childhood development and sometimes even specifically Grade R, were made as key promises to the electorate. And so we're grateful that, as has been mentioned in a previous portfolio committee, we believe that we do have the collective understanding of the honourable members of this committee of the importance of funding Grade R. And it's for that reason that we're particularly concerned that it yet again has failed to be made as a key requirement for the passing of the second tabled budget. So when we speak about the legal position, the Bella Act, as we've mentioned previously, makes Grade R compulsory, and it includes this within the definition of basic education. And when we're speaking about compulsory education, we're of course not only speaking about the obligation itself, but we must bear in mind, as has been raised to us by multiple parents previously in fear this year, that there is a concomitant punishment that can happen in terms of imprisonment for parents who do not send their children to Grade R. And we've had multiple clients, including earlier in the year where we ran an advocacy campaign trying to raise awareness of what Bella entailed, of parents saying they're concerned that they're not going to be able to find a place for their child in grade R because there aren't enough places available and will therefore be sent to prison. Now, of course, the legal position is that if the government has failed to make those positions available, parents can't be sent to prison for that. But that has done precious little to remove the fear that many parents have, and the justified anger that many parents have that they are being held accountable for positions that are not necessarily available. Now, there's nothing inherently unlawful about unfunded mandates, Chair, but this particular unfunded mandate is very blatantly, with very few grey areas, clearly unlawful. That's not only because there are clear consequences to the failure to fund this mandate, as I've mentioned previously, because it is compulsory as of January of this year, but also because during the development of the BELA Act, which is now an act, the Department of Basic Education costed grade R implementation at 17 billion, as required under the PFMA. They did all that was necessary to provide that costing. There was 5.26 billion rand for educators and 12 billion rand required for infrastructure. These figures were known to Parliament and Treasury, neither of whom have contested them and who have made reference repeatedly in meetings afterwards to those figures. The problem is that the PFMA is silent on what happens when Treasury decides not to fund a properly costed mandate. And this legislative gap is what's allowing the executive to effectively nullify its own priorities, nullify enacted legislation and substitute its own priorities for those that it's established throughout the democratic legislative process. And so essentially, Chair, what we're looking at here is the legislative authority of this committee and of Parliament more broadly being overridden by fiscal policy. What we're concerned about, of course, as the Equal Education Law Centre, is the devastating impact which this continues to have on the rights of children to early childhood development in grade R, and of course, basic education more broadly. But this should come as a concern to any concerned citizen, and ultimately, of course, to members of the National Assembly, that it would be possible for constitutional past costed legislation to be enacted, and through what has been described incorrectly as a policy decision by Treasury, for that not to be enacted or not to be implementable because there's no funding for it. That is something which would be a concern across any realm of legislation, and should be deeply concerning considering the lack of public buy-in which happens as a result. So when we speak about the current impact on children, we've mentioned that there are, in previous presentations, approximately 200,000 children which need to be brought into the system under compulsory grade R. These are 200,000 children which should have access to grade R, but do not. There've already been 4,365 unplaced learners reported in the Western Cape, where the MEC has explicitly referred to an entirely unfunded national mandate for compulsory grade R. And when we speak about these provincial crises, these are funding crises which already exist under provincial education departments, where every provincial education department so far in their presentations to portfolio committees, Chair, have indicated that a failure at a national level to fund this mandate will lead to a failure for these, or an inability for these provincial education departments to provide for compulsory grade R. And as a consequence of these constitutional governance failures, because of course this is constitutionally passed and mandated legislation, there's a concern about the separation of powers, as we've mentioned. There's also a deep concern about cooperative governance, where there's an environment where even efficiently run provinces are set up to fail because they're not given the funding that's required for them to enact their legislative obligations. We have deep concerns about the rule of law, which suggests that laws are, optional guidelines binding only for citizens, but not for the state. And of course, as we've already received from worried parents in this specific instance, we have parents who are being told that grade R is compulsory yet can't access it. And this deeply erodes public trust, not only in the legislation itself, but in the legislative process and what people can assume happens once legislation is enacted. And so to conclude, Chair, when we speak about parliamentary and Treasury's responsibility, of course, we continue to seek concrete answers which have not come from Treasury so far on what the way forward is for this funding that should have been provided legally from the beginning of this year. And these are 6 months that unfortunately we cannot get back, in which funding has been failed to be provided for compulsory grade R. All we've received so far in terms of the most concrete answer, Chair, is that there will be discussions with provincial education departments for funding for next year, which of course completely ignores the fact that this is an existing legal obligation. But of course, we are also seeking members of Parliament to comply with their obligations, and to fulfill their obligations, which is to ensure that when adopting budgets, provinces can provide basic services and perform functions allocated to them. And of course, that when legislation is enacted by this very parliament, that Treasury makes sure that the funding is available for that legislation to be implemented. And so, Chair, we ask in closing how this committee plans to fulfill its constitutional obligation to pass a lawful budget when grade R, which is the legal obligation created through legislation enacted by this parliament, remains unfunded. We ask how there will be a justification for approving a budget that renders your own legislation unimplementable, and of course, that flies in the face of many of the commitments made in the manifestos of the parties that the members represent. So, Chair, we're very grateful for the opportunity to make this presentation, and we'll end here, but of course are happy to take any questions.
No, thank you very much. And I have a question, but if there are any members who would like to ask questions, let me allow them to do so. Are there any members wishing to put a question?
Yes, Chairperson.
Recognize. Yes, let me also recognize Honorable Talega Mazibuko, who's on the platform. So let me start with Honorable Mwali and then Honorable Talega Mazibuko.
Chairperson, what of the presentation, and I would like to ask the stakeholders to send in a written submission if they have not sent it. I asked the same question when we were at the office of the FFC, when we were having a briefing with the FFC, that because there's a legislative mandate since the act was made to a law, so where is the funding of the Bella Act? And the answer that I got from the FFC, they said it is not allocated in the budget. So I'm very much interested in the submission. So I would really ask that so that we can take it better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Talega Mazibuko.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I think I'm partly covered, although the member's network was not at the best. But it's true, Chair. The money must follow the vision, or the money must follow the act, as the presenter is saying, that the Bella Act is there, and the implementation of the Bella Act depends on the funding for the implementation. But I saw on the budget also the increase on the allocation for the ECD from 17 to 24 rands per child. So I just want to check if that the presenter or the organization, if that is going to have an impact when the kids then move from ECD to grade R. But I do agree that yes, the money or the budget must follow the policy. Thanks.
My question really is the compensation for public failure is often private sector engagement. Has Equal 27 thought about how Equal Education deal with the idea of where provinces sit in terms of, is there private sector intervention that can come into play, A? And B, when we look at the provincial equitable share formula, often there's a big debate about whether or not some of these unfunded mandates are being able to be fulfilled, because it can be a varying budget allocation across all 9 provinces, depending on where the formula lands. So have you considered which provinces are most adversely affected and which ones are still in a stronger position, and also what private sector intervention may come into play? Let me allow you to respond on that score.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not sure which order I should respond in, but I'll if it's okay, I'll just respond chronologically. So yes, we are very happy to send in our our previous written submissions are essentially identical to this, but we will definitely send that in for the benefit of the honourable members. Very happy to do so. To answer the question asked by the honourable member, the second question. So yes, we are aware, of course, of the provisional allocation that's been made of approximately 10 billion to raise the ECD subsidy from 17 Rand eventually to 24 Rand. And it is a very important subsidy increase. However, unfortunately, this applies to ECD subsidies per children per day at ECD centres. And so the effect of that subsidy won't be felt by children in grade R, and of course not by provinces in grade R. And if I understood the second part of your question correctly, to the honourable member through you, Chair, that subsidy, of course, once a child moves from an ECD centre to grade R, will no longer happen. There are, of course, separate payments that are made per learner per day by provincial education departments in basic education. And it's part of that funding that there needs to be additional funding allocated for grade R. So that, that's 17 billion in total. But thank you very much for that question. And then to you, Chair. So we do have preliminary indications from representations made by the provincial education departments themselves that certain departments are facing particularly strong pressures, and I don't mention these for the sake of exposing any provinces or anything. These are just based on the representations they've made. We have heard particularly concerning information coming out of the Eastern Cape Department of Education, the KZN Department of Education, and other provinces such as Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and even to an extent Gauteng. We also have had representations heard from the Western Cape Education Department, which has indicated that although it is allocating money for the expansion of grade R, it does not have the funding required from the national government to meet its obligation to universalize grade R access. And in terms of where the private sector can come in, Chair, this is a very helpful question, and I'm grateful for it, because one of the key concerns in the fact that the budget doesn't mention funding for grade R at all is that there is little to no mandate provided under the budgetary framework for appropriate private sector investment. But we say appropriate because, of course, there have to be very specific guardrails set up when we have things like private sector investment or private sector collaboration in such a sensitive area. And one of the concerns with the fact that it's currently not mentioned is that there is no framework for that. In addition, one of the key infrastructural programs that is currently being used by Treasury is the Blended Finance Initiative, which of course relies heavily on private sector involvement. And of course, there's no indication, I must be honest, Chair, that this is necessarily going to be used for grade R, but under the presumption that that may be an option in future, that should also be of concern because that model essentially requires the private sector to see investable opportunities. And in many of the provinces which are the most cash-strapped, for lack of a better word, it will be very difficult to convince the private sector, particularly in very remote rural areas, to make those investments. And that is something where the state particularly needs to step in, where we're doing so, yes, of course, because of long-term realizations on those investments in ECD, but also because of our constitutional obligations. So I hope that answers the question, but I'm very grateful for those questions, and I'm very happy to provide our written submissions as well.
No, thank you very much. I think it's helpful, and certainly because it doesn't look at this stage in time, this is the age-old debate about public finance, is that I totally endorse your view that says that Parliament itself is enacting legislation to which often funding doesn't follow that function. So Bella is but one example of this issue, and I can tell you NHI is falling behind from a funding point of view, etc., etc. So there's a number of pieces of legislation, but we can't fold our arms and say, well, we can't have private sector engagement here in this regard, because when you look at the total cumulative GDP, our expenditure as it speaks to ACD and grade 1 is less relative to other developing economies of our size. And therefore, there needs to be, if you like, the blended approach towards how we do it. So I want to appreciate your inputs there. But if you stay towards the end, I'm sure National Treasury will be able to respond in this regard. Thank you very much. Let's move over to the next presentation, which is by Y Capital. Our members from Y Capital here, if they are not at the Youth Parliament themselves.
They are here, Chair.
If you can introduce yourself.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you so much. I'm with my colleague, Clotilde. I'm going to do the presentation, and Clotilde will be flagging the slide.
Can I have access? Can I get sharing rights so that I can share the our slides?
Yeah, you've been made the co-host already.
Okay, great. I just need a second.
While they do that, Honorable Talaga Mazibuko, I see your hand is still up. Is this a legacy hand or a new point?
It's a legacy hand, sort of.
That's what we typically describe as historical injustice. Is that what you are saying, Honorable Talaga Mazibuko? Anyways, let us proceed with Y Capital. You can present. Your time will begin as soon as your slides are flighted. Thank you.
Can't you see my screen?
We can see it. You can proceed.
Okay, Napa, here we go. Okay, I'm starting. Sorry. So you might have heard from us before, and we are a campaign that advocates for policy change to solve youth unemployment. And yeah, in this presentation, we want to focus on the youth bulge. We've seen that according to Status's quarterly labor force survey, young people aged 15 to 34 constitute roughly 50% of the working age population, but we've also seen a 10% increase in unemployment in the last 10 years. When looking at the youth demographic, we've seen that 1 in 2 young people, according to the expanded definition of unemployment, 1 in 2 young people are willing to work but can't find pathways into economic opportunities. And another difficult number is actually the number of NEET, which are 50% of young people are not in education, employment, or training. The real crisis, Chair and honorable members, is that the absorption rate for young people is incredibly low. And if one disaggregates it, the absorption is 10% for young people in the 15-24 age group and 44% for those in the 25-34 age group. And we've seen that this is incredibly low, far below the world average. We welcome in this budget the return of the Basic Education Employment Initiative. You might remember us last year raising the point that the funding for this program, which is the largest public employment programs for young people, last year wasn't unfolded from UIF. There were some administration issues, and it's come back, but for 200,000 teacher assistant positions. And I just want to raise the point that 1.9 million young people applied for 200,000 positions. So the demand for work is massive, but the opportunities are not there. And we've also put together the roller coaster of BEI opportunities since its inception in 2020. And we can see a big gap in 2024. So young people are really left behind, and we've seen that there are not economic opportunities for young people, even when the economy grows. So even in the good times, young people are just left behind. National Treasury often indicates the construction multiplier for its calculations, but social protection spending also has a multiplier dimension. So the report by Cardoso also shows that the multiplier of social protection expenditure is positively correlated to inequality. And we're in a country that is driven by the NDP, the National Development Plan, with the vision of solving unemployment, inequality, and poverty. So we've seen that public employment programs the funding, it's always very uncertain. But we've also seen the impact of these programs in the economy by providing work opportunities, stimulating demand at local level, and providing essential services. And the report by the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation in 2024 on youth program confirms that these programs are underfunded for the scope that they have. Yeah, so we just want to raise, and we've made this point before, that the funding keeps on shifting, and these programs play a critical role in stimulating demand, providing work opportunities, and providing work experience. So we need to expand the budget, especially in a country where we've seen that unemployment keeps on ticking up. We also want to make a cautionary note on the job seeker allowance, and that was following the speech by the finance minister, saying that they are relooking at the SRD grant with the option of swapping it for job seeker allowance. That in this context, that I've painted a picture where job opportunities are not there for young people who are willing to work. Youth Capital has previously done some research following the Siaka study by the University of Johannesburg on the cost of looking for work. And we've seen that especially the transport amount keeps on going up. Young people spend around 1,000 Rand a month, with transport being the lion's share, around 700 Rand a month. And fuel levy will here make an impact. When we ask young people whether they have to choose between looking for work and going for interviews and buying food, 8 in 10, they say yes, absolutely. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that incentivizing job seeking is positive, but the opportunities are not there. So that's not a behavior that we can incentivize without focusing on real economic opportunities. So in terms of our recommendations is that we need to relook at the economy, the employment multiplier. Because of the dire needs that we have in our countries, we need to look at the multiplier and the impact of social spending. We need to have a permanent funding windows for public employment programs. They need to be like in a country with structural unemployment like ours, they need to be a consistent feature. And then we also urge the release of the active labor market programs review. We need to disclose those fundings because we hear that these are the fundings that are directing National Treasury choices. So these are really important for further evaluation by civil society. And this is us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any honorable members who would like to then ask questions, particularly to Y Capital? These are clarity-seeking questions on the basis of the presentation. Honorable Waitlin, I recognize your hand. Is there any other hand that is on the platform?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Chair, just a quick, if we want to submit comments, can we do it afterwards? Because I've just got a quick comment on the submission that was made.
You can make the comment now, because at the end I'll allow National Treasury to respond. I just want to get clarity-seeking questions, specifically for the presentation. So if you can go from there.
Okay, let me rather wait for National Treasury to respond, and then I'll see if they pick up. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I want to ask a question. What do you make of the PES, or the Presidential Employment Stimulus, as it speaks to this? The President spoke quite glowingly about its own success, its opportunities. What does Y Capital make of that? And is that a component of the basket of work opportunities that you believe are available for young people? And whether or not, were we to rather think about it as an appropriation, but to think about it as an incentive? So if the incentives like the incentive tax scheme, all of those in terms of how do we help young people find employment, do you think there's an opportunity in that regard? Let me get your responses there.
Oh, great. Yes. So the Basic Education Employment Initiative is a flagship program of the Presidential Employment Stimulus. And what the Presidential Employment Stimulus has shown, Chair, is that the impact of providing work experience and community services at scale. So the teacher assistant program has taken place in over 20,000 schools across the country, which means like
recording stopped.
Schools in community townships, farms. So the Presidential Employment Stimulus has, there's some interesting lessons that are coming out of that program, and definitely needs to be part of a portfolio of solutions. But the funding for the Presidential Employment Stimulus has shrunk. And just making a note again that the Basic Education Employment Initiative didn't run last year. I also want to say that the problem is that the system, the unemployment is so structural that we're not going to solve it with one solution. So public employment programs, the Presidential Employment Stimulus, EPWP and CWP, they play a role. But the question is, what do young people do when they leave these short-term opportunities? So the employment tax incentive could play a key role, but the research from Professor Borat and like UCT, available research on the employment tax incentive shows that the results are not clear on whether it is incentivizing the creation of employment opportunities. Are we speaking to the private sector in a correct way? And are we providing young people with a tool to then, are we responding? Are we creating demand enough for these young people to provide essential work? This is the real question. And the employment tax incentive should definitely be looked at and evaluated and see where adjustments can be made.
I apologize. Thank you very much. And we really appreciate the inputs that you've made in this regard. And I'm always grateful. I want to encourage you as Y Capital. Certainly in this committee, I've appreciated the insights you've given, and please continue the fight as it speaks to the plight of unemployed youth. Because statistically, if we do nothing, this is about probably the most devastating aspect of our society that we can't ignore, which is the fact that I think 2 out of 3 young people just in general cannot find work, which means that effectively your probability of being able to find work is fairly limited. And as a committee, our job is to fight on behalf of those citizens equally so. And so what I will look for is where not only, yes, there's a macroeconomic climate that is suppressed, that's low GDP growth and low gross capital formation, but how do we ensure that we build a much broader work opportunities for young people is going to be the crucial question, certainly when you look at the numbers as it speaks to needs. Let me recognize the fact that we'll move on to COSATU. I think Mr. Parks is on this platform. I see sharing rights have been allocated to them. Let me allow COSATU to then proceed next. As soon as the slides are up, we can then go, and then your time will begin from there. Mr. Parks, over to you.
Morning, Chair, morning, members. Thank you for giving us a chance just to raise some of our views. We appreciate it as always, Chair. Let me just quickly upload it. Yeah, it should be there. So I think, Chair, just to kind of focus on a few key points. Obviously, as a trade union federation, we view the budget as our most important tool as society from government side. How to address our fundamental socio-economic challenges. We've been stumbling along a 1% GDP growth rate for the past decade. Over the MTEF, it only projects a 1.6% growth rate. So nowhere near the 3% we really need to reduce unemployment. We have seen, Chair, since budget 1.0, actually unemployment has increased by 1.5%, over 43% now. For young people, Chair, 72%. We have obviously really entrenched levels of poverty and inequality, of crime and corruption. You've seen workers really struggling with the rising cost of living. I think we've seen, especially at a municipal level, really under-strained infrastructure, SOEs too. And of course, public services are struggling, and just generally a kind of a bit of a sense of despair among society. Chair, kind of our key expectations really, from the division revenue bill, is how do we kind of respond to the budget cuts which have really crippled public and municipal services that workers, businesses, economy depend upon? What are the interventions to really turn provincial departments, municipalities around? How do we put stimulus to help move the economy to a much higher gear, especially if we want to grow? How do you support SMEs, industrial export sectors, and so forth? And whilst you address these economic obstacles, how do you provide a pathway for an army of 12 million people unemployed through the public employment programs? And of course, giving SARS support as well to deal with the tax evasion, which is needed to fund these investments in provincial and local government and so forth. Chair, and we know, kind of SARS falls under the appropriation bill, but I think we must appreciate the kind of additional allocations there. And I think we must welcome that the work of these members of this committee and other members across Parliament to reverse the VAT hike. I think that shows you, Chair, the real value of Parliament. And I think Parliament's kind of role has been almost of a maturing of age, so to speak. And that's a welcome moment in our democratic evolution. It's messy, it's fine, but it's a welcome moment. I think we want to appreciate all members across party lines for their efforts to do this. And of course, we must say, though, however, Chair, not adjusting PIT brackets, not extending fuel tax relief is a bit of a disappointment. So just here some proposals here, even though it's not under division revenue bill, but just for members' thoughts about some of our additional revenue proposals and how we could try to make sure the state does have the resources it requires to fund its various commitments in provinces, in local government, etc. Chair, one thing we do want to raise, though, which we think is relevant, especially to the infrastructure and public employment programs, because we do appreciate, and Treasury the Minister for Finance will correctly say, we all want these things. Where do we get the money from? We need to kind of find the right balance in terms of revenue and expenditure. We do agree we need to manage the debt scenario. I think not so much the level of our debt. I think more the growth in the debt rate in the past decade plus. And, was kind of basically tripled, I think, from 24% to about 76%, give or take. So we had to kind of raise proposals, Chair, and we still think, even though this kind of budget, the fiscal framework has been adopted, was it on Wednesday? But, as we head towards the medium-term budget policy statement, as we prepare for the budget next year, etc., I think for us, there are kind of two weak points in the budget. One is around infrastructure. We need to allocate much more. One is around public employment programs. And, how do you help mobilize some finances for the state? And one thing we thought, Chair, is that to engage the development of financial institutions, like the Development Bank, the Industrial Development Corporation, the Public Investment Corporation, whose mandate is to invest in infrastructure, in the economy, etc. Why can't they take some of the burden of the economic infrastructure investments off the state's balance sheet? For example, the 13,000 university beds, the PIC could easily take that on board because they could secure a return on investment from it, they could own it, etc., make money out of it. But you could ease the burden on the state, for example. You could do other things. So you could ask these DFIs to take over 50 billion rand, even more economic infrastructure projects. And similarly, Chair, you could engage the DFIs, the CETA, the National Skills Fund too, who there is a need to have a real discussion about their output, which I think on many fronts is glaringly underwhelming. Could they not also take a greater burden of the public employment programs and the skills training programs too? Because again, Chair, we have 12 million people who are unemployed. The public employment programs are a critical tool to provide a pathway for young people to enter labor market, to gain the skills and experience, earn a minimum wage, etc., the first job. So I think there is an initial good step in this regard where I think 22 billion rand has been secured from the UIF for the public employment programs. We think we could even have a greater discussion around that. So again, to see how do you expand the investments of the state, but also how do you share the fiscal responsibilities too, given the tight constraints. And similarly, you know, a broader discussion with the Reserve Bank too about how can it give through the GIFRECA greater support. But let me leave that part, Chair. So I deviated a little bit for members. Chair, on the public services, you know, I think we appreciate the wage agreement being honoured, and it's a 3-year agreement. So it gives some stability to the state in terms of budgetary projections. It gives comfort to nurses, to police officers who are not really paid much. It's inflation linked. Sure, we know that, you know, every budget cycle, the commentariat will say that, well, the wage bill is out of control, but in fact, we see a real decline of basically about a quarter. You know, from the early stages of democracy, it was about 40%. From 2008, it was about 35% of the budget. In the last 2 years, has declined to about 31, just over 31% of the budget. The headcount, Chair, if you take the headcount, because people would also say, well, the state is bloated. And it makes, you know, an exciting JPEG headline. But in reality, the public service headcount has been static at 1.2 million, yet our population has nearly doubled in the 30 years of democracy. So you are seeing real pressure points upon a rising teacher-to-learner ratio, or rising ratio of nurses and doctors to patients, or police to society. And that does have an impact upon the quality of public services they can deliver. If you look at Home Affairs, you have about a 60% vacancy rate. So we can't be surprised then when the state is struggling to deliver public services. So we do need to have a discussion about the impact of the freeze in public service posts and the ability of the state to deliver the goods that the economy requires to grow, and also how we modernize public services and look for smart solutions. Chair, I think there's been some positive above inflation allocation to some of the public and municipal services, especially I think around education and health, which begin to try to undo some of the damage of the wage cuts. There's some useful filling of frontline posts. So nurses, teachers is about additional 1,000 plus 5,500 existing posts, about 4,000 for the police and so forth. But we're a bit disappointed. In the budget 1.0, Chair, it was about 1,650 doctors, and I think that's been cut to about 800 doctors. Doesn't make sense when you have a large number of doctors who can't find work in the state, large number of nurses, etc. But, you know, I think we need to have further discussions saying, how can we resolve that in MTBBS and so forth. But I think, Chair, we also need to kind of reflect that investing in the state is actually, it benefits working class communities, but also helps to grow the economy. So yes, you'll pay money today, but you'll reap the rewards through economic growth, additional taxes, etc. Chair, we do have some concerns about the early retirement offers. You may lose valuable skills, as we've seen with previous offers, where, you know, teachers with a lot of experience, etc., or doctors may choose to leave and so forth. Chair, I know this point should be a point which you will be, I would assume, very excited about. We're quite excited about it. The rolling out of the ECD, you know, 700,000 learners should be, you know, begin to come on board through grade R and so forth. There's really a major achievement, and I think will have long-term benefits. And, you know, of course, about just under 4 billion for school infrastructure for 140 schools. We would hope to have some positive feedback in the near future about addressing the sanitation issues of the schools and so forth. There's some useful allocations to smart electricity meters, 2 billion rand. We think these should be expanded because it helps secure ESCOM in terms of making sure it receives the monies due to it. There's some positive allocations for health, for NHI, for 2 hospitals in Western Cape and Limpopo as well. And hopefully, you know, Malutu Perform, Chair, which has been a perennial crisis around water. We hope that investments around infrastructure there will help. But we are a bit concerned, Chair, about some cuts towards informal settlement upgrading. You know, it's just under 3 billion this year, it's 1 billion rand next year, and that gives us some concerns when we see the growth in informal settlements. Chair, I think, you know, the Minister for Finance has made commitments around auditing to look for any ghost posts. I think, you know, those can be useful where they exist. Good, let's deal with it and fill those with warm bodies and make sure we deal with those who have abused the systems. We do think there's a need, Chair, to have some discussion about some of these public sector entities, which is quite a proliferation, that they should actually be brought back into the public service. Because, Chair, you'll be amazed that, you know, the management of some of these public sector entities, the CEOs and so forth, they make more than the minister or the president even. And again, you'd rather have a public service regime which is more synchronized, etc., when the state is more coherent. We do think there's a need to reduce some of the executives on top and also reduce some of the kind of what we would say is blinging expenditure for travel, for advertising, consultants, and so forth. If you want to send a message to society about tightening the belt, and the leadership of the state must lead from the front. Chair, I think our major concern about the Division Revenue Bill, Chair, is that we all know local government is in deep trouble, whichever indicator you take. It's about 70% of municipalities today are in financial distress. That's up from about 10% a decade ago. We have about 3 dozen who routinely fail to pay staff. We have about 160 municipal employees and councillors, pension funds in arrears across basically every province. You have, municipalities, municipal debt to ESCOM has doubled to over 95 billion rand in the past couple of years.
Mr. Parks, I don't want to rush you along, but you need to begin to land the plane.
Move on. Okay, how many minutes do I have left, Chair?
I will discretionarily use another 2 or 3 minutes, but if you can begin to wrap up, because I've given you more than what I've given others.
Apologies for that.
Yeah.
Okay, now let me gallop. So I think, Chair, basically, we don't really see what are the new interventions to stabilize and to rebuild local government. We've just highlighted here for members' benefit some of the municipalities who are currently in salary arrears. And these ones tend to be the same suspects in the same provinces year after year. So for members' benefit, and it really tends to be these municipalities. So you will become quite familiar with them, Ditsabotla, etc., perennial problem children. So we do think there's a need to really kind of expedite interventions by COGTA, by Treasury, to stabilize, to help capacitate municipalities, and to really look at a new municipal funding model moving towards a district development model. Chair, I think on the positive part of the Division Revenue Bill is really the massive investment in infrastructure of over $1 trillion. And this, I think our plea to Parliament really is to make sure that the money is spent, it's spent correctly, spent timelessly. But that really we think can add at least 1% plus to the economic growth rate. We do think there is a need to have a discussion about a larger industrial SME export sector investment plan, including mobilizing resources from both the public and private sector, and let's have that discussion in the run-up to the MTPBS. Chair, some of the relief measures are positive, especially for the social grant recipients. The public employment programs are positive, but there are some areas of concerns, including not adjusting the SOD for inflation. And again, Chair, we think there's a need to have a discussion at NEDLAC and in the run-up to the MTPBS about how can we really expand public employment programs. Chair, so let me stop there. Just the last slide on the public sector pensions bill. Our view is that this is really an administrative bill. We don't think there's any issues with it. And it does recognize the state's responsibility ultimately as in terms of the financing of those funds. And of course, it also recognizes the role of collective bargaining. So I think from our side of the pension bill, Chair, we are fine with it. So let me stop there, Chair, and apologies for exploiting hospitality, but thanks very much, Chair. Thank you.
No, the last thing I need is unions marching on the committee. They seem to mobilize quite well. Is there any questions from any member on the platform to Mr. Parks, or the clarity questions, as it were, considering that COSATU do not account to this committee, they're making public submissions? Honorable Wakelin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to Mr. Fox. On the 160 arrears that he refers to on pension funds, are these particular government pension funds, or is he also referring to private pension funds? I just want clarity on that. Thank you. And if he has got a bigger figure, if he could maybe share that.
And Mr. Parks, I suppose my question to you really speaks to I've heard you on a couple of occasions raise this point about the size of public service. I'm imagining your argument is that it hasn't kept up with population growth as a proportion if you benchmark it against what it was in 1994. So I follow your assertion in this regard. But my question then becomes, public service has benefited from multi-year wage deals higher than most sectors, given that even in this current financial year, it's benefited from a 5.5 or thereabouts multi-year wage deal, which effectively is higher than the rate of inflation and isn't catching up with GDP growth. Now, my question more specifically, the Public Service Commission raises this issue of saying it's not headcount that we should be obsessed with. It's actually, as people have had this bracket creep, as it were, over the number of years, you're finding public servants have benefited from high wages at a much higher level. So your DDGs, your DGs, all of that sort of directorate level is overly compensated, and it isn't. So do you share the view that's a Public Service Commission point of view, or do you not? Or certainly, I want to understand, how do you rationalize the state if you were to go forward so that we can get more teachers, nurses, lawyers, doctors? The problem at the moment is that you can't do that with ease, given the overinflation of payment at higher levels. At least that's what the Public Service Commission would say. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, no, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Honorable Wakelin. So Honorable Wakelin's question, Chair, about the pension funds. So those specific 160 pension funds, that's specifically for municipalities. It's combined both municipal employees, but also some councillor pension funds too. And so we're just going to highlight it because we normally just try to highlight for members' sake, because of division revenues, focal point on local government, some of the challenges there that are experienced. Chair, in terms of the overall pension funds in arrears, the latest report from the Financial Sector Conduct Authority is about 7,000 pension funds across the economy, public and private. Key corporates in the private sector tend to be the security industry, the cleaning sectors, and in the state, it tends to be municipal sector. We've had some discussion with the FFC, and I'd like to see how to really crack down on that. It's a ticking time bomb. You can imagine a worker about to retire, then finding out that he has been robbed of his pension fund by the employer. That can really become very ugly very quickly. So there is some discussion about strengthening the labor laws to require labor inspectors when they go to workplaces to check compliance. And of course, the Minister for Employment and Labor is actually, under the Presidential Employment Program, is in the process of adding an additional 10,000 inspectors now, and they'll hire an additional 10,000 next year. So we hope that's going to begin to shift the needle. And of course, the two-part pension reform has also really helped mobilize workers to be more active in checking their pension funds, have payments been received, etc. Because ultimately, that's the most effective way, is when society itself becomes the sheriff, so to speak. And then, Chair, to your question, Chair. So I think for us there is a real problem with the public sector not keeping pace with inflation. If you look at some of the indicators or best practice indicators from the United Nations and other expert bodies, to the police to society, teachers to learners, nurses and doctors to patients, we're kind of falling behind. And that's why you find long queues at day hospitals, you find declining community policing, long queues at home affairs, and of course there's an impact upon society, workers, businesses, the economy, etc. To your question, Chair, about the wage increase. So yes, this year the increase was slightly above inflation, about 1% above inflation. The next 2 years is inflation linked, basically. But just also bear in mind, Chair, that in 2020, the wage agreement was reneged by the late Minister for Finance. So there was no increase that year. And then the couple of years after that, the increase was actually far below inflation. So that's the one thing, just to bear in balance. But I think the 3-year agreement, it benefits all parties. I think it makes it easier for all parties. Then you could look at additional issues outside of a wage bill. So, for example, public servants, nurses who can't afford home loans. Is there a space for the GPF to assist them, for example, affordable home loans? So you kind of ease the pressure upon the fiscus, but also ease the pressure upon nurses and teachers and so on. I think, Chair, the one issue also to bear in mind is that it's easy to demonize public servants, but we often forget that it's 100,000 nurses, it's 350,000 teachers, it's 180,000 police officers. So one need to compare what those specific professions earn in the public sector to what they would earn in the private sector. And you often find that they would earn far less in the public sector. But I agree with the point, Chair, about bracket creep that has an impact upon earnings. And we would agree with your point, Chair, about let's differentiate between what a DG or senior management earns versus what a police officer, constable earns. And you find there's a huge gap. I would rather err on the side of the frontline workers. So let me stop there, Chair. I think the camera came on as a polite hint to me to wrap up. Thanks very much, Chair.
No, I appreciate it. And no one is trying to demonize public servants. I'm just trying to make sure that, to your closing remark, where do we default to? We need to default towards frontline services, and therefore, the more I pay senior managers, the less I can afford in head numbers to increase frontline workers. That is the point I'm making. So I think there we are on the same space. Can I request next on the presentation is TB accountability? Is the member from TB
Yes,
accountability here? You are there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
You have been presumably given sharing rights, etc.
Yes, I have. Thank you so much.
Please introduce yourself, and your time will start now. Over to you.
All right. Good day, Honorable Chair, as well as to the honorable members. My name is Sihlema Hongandawonde, and I'm part of the TB Accountability Consortium, as was mentioned. I would like to pose to you this following question. Do all lives matter? In the last 12 months, an estimated 56,000 people died of TB, and this is a treatable and preventable disease. And since the first budget was tabled 93 days ago, 13,857 people have also lost their lives to this disease. Since then, there has been much political contestation around the institutional arrangements of the government, but I must reiterate, as being one of the millions of South Africans of the Section 27 right to health, and this is expanded within the National Health Act of Section 61, which is in establishing a unified national health system and to ensure equitable access to health services across provinces. So within this context and within this platform, the state is legally obligated to fund and expand TB services, especially for vulnerable and underserved populations. And yet, as we've seen through the January 20 announcements, that underfunding, staff losses, and grant shortfalls undermine the progressive realization of access and threaten the gains made under the End TB strategy. This is a global strategy set up by the World Health Organization. And so we also see the reduction in TB incidences, meaning the rate of TB cases that develop within a population, and mortality is contingent on fulfilling these constitutional and legislative commitments. So publicly funded healthcare is in distress, and since the March budget, the situation has worsened significantly. Allocations to health have decreased in real terms over the last decade, despite increases to cost of health and various health pressures on the system. So provincial departments are struggling with conditional grants, and the withdrawal of overseas development assistance has resulted in significant funding gaps in the response to HIV and TB. And so we see this 20 billion allocated to health over the 3 years, and this includes the equitable share increase. But if you look at it in real terms year by year, 6 billion is not going to be sufficient to meet this challenge, and the gains to HIV treatment are at significant risk at this current time. Chronic underfunding, as noted by the minister in his initial speech, have contributed to provincial budgets carrying over budget shortfalls in excess of 22 billion rand. And this withdrawal of overseas development assistance again has resulted in the loss of 15,000 frontline staff and a further 9,000 technical staff, including staff at a successful CCMDD program. This, in turn, has removed the operational capacity in rendering TB and HIV services nationwide. So there is an ambitious End TB campaign that has been put forward. And so over the last 10 years, the National TB Program has halved TB incidences, increased TB case finding, and reduced deaths. But at this moment in time, this is not enough, as South Africa's TB program has launched this End TB campaign, which aims to test 5 million people within the 2025-2026 budget. This involves diagnosing 250,000 new cases, and this is expected to lead a projected 29% reduction in TB incidence and a 41% reduction in mortality by 2025. This campaign works closely with the HIV/AIDS Close the Gap campaign and aims to test and link those who have been lost to be put back into care. We are also aware that through the South African National AIDS Council, the establishment of a TB caucus is in the works. And so we hope that this caucus can aim to engage members of parliament, specifically from the portfolio committees of health, finance, social development, and appropriations, in a focused discussion in enhancing the understanding of the TB epidemic in our country and capacitating them in supporting the national Close the Gap and End TB campaigns. But there are risks, honourable members. Healthcare is primarily managed at provincial level. And where there are competing priorities, this includes the previously mentioned 22 billion rand in accruals. We only have 3 out of the 5 million tests funded to reach this target. And there are disparities in testing capacity, which is at provincial level. And in addition to this, there is a 4 to 6 billion rand funding gap for the Close the Gap campaign as well. There are general capacity problems, medicine shortages, the shortage of doctors and nurses within provinces, and these issues have been long-standing and have now been exacerbated with these funding cuts. And that while the additional allocations will fund public sector wage increases, together with the allowance of the employment of the 800 healthcare professionals, our concern remains that not enough money will be allocated to meet the funds to see the NTB campaign fully realized. And so our recommendations are that we call on the members of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces to request a provincial Department of Health to submit plans on how they're going to avoid these increased TB deaths. Interventions within the NTB campaign, as well as the Close the Gap campaign, should aim to align with evidence and in high burden provinces. And this is within the Eastern Cape, KZN, and the Western Cape. Those are the 3 highest burden provinces that we've seen within the equitable share, and should make representations at national level. The second recommendation is to review allocations for the conditional grants. We ask that the National Department of Health to provide detail on how the District Health Program grant conditional has been prioritized to ensure that lives are not lost. We still have lives dying at this present moment. And lastly, we ask for a joint sitting of the committees on health, finance, and appropriations to ensure that this receives the sufficient political priority that it so deserves. 56,000 people do not need to die from TB. And during these proceedings, another 4 to 7 people have died from TB. And again, honourable members, we call on you to course correct. Are these 56,000 not grievable lives? Most of these are being men, in which this committee is actually mostly constituted of. And so I repeat my quote from my first presentation of the author John Green. We know how to live in a world without tuberculosis, but we choose not to live in that world. Thank you, Honourable Chair. We are open for questions and comments.
No, thank you very much for just that compelling and confronting reality that you face up to us. And perhaps maybe let me allow members on the platform to ask questions, and notwithstanding issues around NHI, etc. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Other members would like to ask questions. I think the men have gotten scared to the presenter. You said we recognize the majority on this. So now we are hiding.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, most of the people that are dying from TB are men, and I think it's important for you to actually consider these ramifications, unfortunately. So it would be really good for you to consider this, Honourable Chair. Thank you.
No, I respect that, and I'm trying to broadly understand in terms of prevalence. I might have missed it in the presentation, prevalence provincial-wise, because, as you know, health is a shared competence, and there seems to be some challenges around budgeting around these issues of NHI. Now, National Health Insurance, as has been structured, speaks about a particular funding mechanism towards healthcare, at least in my engagements with the minister. So I'm trying to understand how, when you make submissions with the government's ideology, it's not an ideological position, but the rollout of NHI, how do you feel this particular crisis interfaces with that? And then ultimately, which provinces are most impacted in your view?
Well, I think ultimately NHI is meant to improve and progress the realization of healthcare access to everyone. And I think as a public healthcare system, yes, we do have this dual public healthcare situation that we're having. But as we have had these contestations, whether we need private healthcare, public healthcare, we still have people that are poor. We still have Black people who do not have jobs. And I think it's important for us to actually understand that NHI is actually a cause for public dignity. That's ultimately what it's wanting to achieve. We are wanting for universal healthcare coverage. And I think within tuberculosis, as I've mentioned, males predominantly are those who are of higher prevalence within our TB cases. And I think it's important for us to understand the correlations, as what Youth Capital had mentioned earlier, that if people don't have jobs, what are they meant to do? They then, get into really harmful activities. We see those also where we have, gone on to, radio interviews where we've been speaking about lung health. And I think tuberculosis is just a symptom of the political and social, disparities that we have in our country. We have those who are the have and those who are the have-nots. And I think NHI, as the TB Accountability Consortium, is ultimately a cause for public decency and for all South Africans to actually have a right to access to healthcare. So, we obviously are using this platform to shine a light and see the accountability for tuberculosis to be achieved. But ultimately, really, we are just here to champion that Section 27 cause. Thank you.
Really, really much appreciated. And thank you so much again. As a committee, we'll make responses, make submissions into, and I'd be very interested to hear equally. So we've actually got a meeting with the Ministry of Health in the next week, and certainly this will be a conversation that will guide going forward. So I'm much appreciative of the submissions you have made. Let me thank you. Let us then continue with the Budget Justice Coalition. And then lastly will be the Rural Health Advocacy Project, who have requested to go last. So let me allow for the Budget Justice Coalition. If you are on the platform, if you can proceed. Mashile, I'm not sure if they've been given sharing rights in this regard.
Hi, Honorable Chair. Can I just step in? We are not making an oral presentation, but we appreciate you recognizing we're covered by our member organizations before. Thanks for recognizing us. Thank you.
I recognize. Thank you very much. And certainly, I know I read your submission in its, well, I got the written submission in this regard. So I'll certainly will use that timelessly as we prepare the report for this particular committee. Thank you very much. Let me then allow the Rural Health Advocacy Project, if you can proceed as you requested, to be flighted last.
Hi, please could I be granted sharing access?
Yes, granted.
Thank you very much.
You can proceed, yes.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. Good day, Honorable Chair and its members. My name is Celine Coleman from the Rural Health Advocacy Project, and we advocate for rural health care. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Healthcare in rural South Africa currently stands at a critical turning point. As a country, we cannot grow or stabilize without making sure that every person, no matter where they live, can access their basic rights. And that includes access to healthcare as promised by Section 27 of our Constitution. Our Finance Minister recently announced a 20 billion rand increase in the national health budget over the next 3 years. He also has committed to hiring 800 unemployed doctors. This progress is really welcomed, but let's be honest, it might not be enough. Most of the money will go towards increasing salaries, which means that very little is left to actually improve the health services on the ground, especially in rural areas, where people already struggle the most. While hiring more doctors is something to definitely celebrate, There's a real danger that money will be taken away from the community service roles. These are the very roles that support rural health clinics and hospitals. These roles are a key entry point for young doctors and nurses to actually serve in rural areas. Without them, rural communities might lose access to care, and young professionals will actually miss the chance and opportunity to gain experience and make a difference where it's actually needed the most in our rural areas. This budget increase also doesn't make up for the funding we lost with the international donors like PEPFAR. Their support was crucial, especially for HIV and TB services in 27 of our districts, many of them having actually been rural. Now, many of those services have been cut, and people who actually relied on them have been left behind. When we put this all together, so the salary increases, the loss of donor funding, and the rural needs that we face, we see the truth. This budget, although it's bigger, still does not meet the needs of our rural communities, and that means it does not meet the needs of our country. Rural people have been historically excluded and overlooked, and we can't allow that to continue. Poor access to healthcare affects their lives, their work, and their ability to even contribute to our economy. We have the tools. So since 2015, we've been rural-proofing our health policies, making sure that they actually work outside of our cities. Some progress has been made. So we've improved how funding is allocated, and we've included rural voices in planning. But we're still far behind from where we actually need to be. Let me show you some examples of this. So firstly, if we look at maternal health, adolescent pregnancy rates in rural provinces like the Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape, and in Mpumalanga are some of the highest in the country. In places like KwaZulu-Natal, antenatal care coverage is below the 65%. This means that young girls aren't actually getting the care that they need when they need it the most. Many faculties are running out of contraceptives, and 69% of rural girls don't even know where they can go and get help or contraceptives from. If we look at non-communicable diseases, we're seeing a diabetes crisis. Rural women have dangerously high sugar levels. Limpopo has the highest number of these new cases, yet is actually the smallest province by population. In places like Amatole and Ugu, treatment coverage is also far too low at just 28% and 30%, while the national coverage is at 35.8%. If we also look at communicable diseases, we see that HIV and TB has a particularly heavy burden in rural areas. HIV prevalence in rural areas sits at nearly 28%, and these areas only receive a small portion of donor funding. Things like stigma, distance, and under-resourced facilities make the fight against TB and HIV so much harder in these regions. So our message is clear. South Africa has a lot to do to actually change the story of rural healthcare. While the budget is a good start, money alone isn't going to be enough, because what matters is how we use that money. Salaries are important, yes, but so are the medicines, the outreach services, the transport, and the trained staff in these rural clinics that save lives. We have strong policies. We just need to implement them properly, urgently, and with rural realities in mind. Because at the end of the day, the budget is not just about numbers, it's about who and what we prioritize. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we're very grateful to present today.
Thank you very much, and most appreciated for your submission. Is there a member on the platform who would like to put a question to the previous presenters, questions of clarity? Okay. Notwithstanding that, I think, Honorable Mkhonto.
Are you giving me an opportunity to come in, Chair?
Oh, you can. Okay. No, you can proceed, Honorable Mkhonto.
Okay, Chair. We welcome the presentation, Chair. I just want to check from the presenter that if they talk about salary increases, does that include home-based care services in the rural areas? Because the healthcare in the rural areas is mostly dependent on home-based care services. I'm just checking the chair. Thank you.
Siyabonga, Honorable Member. Do you want to respond to that?
As far as we know, it does not actually include home care-based services because that would usually be done by community healthcare workers.
Okay. Let me just, whilst we wrap up just the section here about public hearings, I think, Mashile, we've covered all the people who had indicated they wanted to make submissions. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I'm going to allow National Treasury now to respond to many of the submissions that were done. Honorable Wakelin, you had said that you wanted to make a question, perhaps maybe towards the end. I wasn't clear how you were, did you want to ask a question before National Treasury or after National Treasury?
No, JD, it's just 2 comments I wanted to make, but I would wait for National Treasury to submit and I'll just take a quick up on it. Thank you.
Okay. Let me allow National Treasury to respond in this regard then.
Good morning, honorable chairperson, honorable members of the committee. My name is Ulrika Bridget. I am the DD. We will start answering these questions and respond to recommendations.
Wait, hold on. Yeah, I don't know how, I think I must sponsor data for National Treasury. It does seem as though the line you are connecting on is relatively bad. I don't know if there's another way we can connect. We are literally struggling to hear you.
Well, I'm connected to a fiber line that is quite stable. I can try to connect to a different
maybe what you can do is, I wonder if you did switch off your video, whether it wouldn't help in this regard.
There's just an echo. I think she might have 2 devices on there.
Is that a little bit better?
It sounds better. Is there another device in the room? Because sometimes
No, I'm the only device in the room. And
okay, well, it sounds a bit better. You can proceed from there.
Okay. So let me start again from the beginning. Honorable Chairperson and honorable members of the committee, good morning. My name is Ulrika Bridget. I am the Deputy Director General for Public Finance. We will start responding to the questions in the following order. I will start with our colleagues in Intergovernmental Relations, who is responsible for the Division of Revenue Bill. And then on some sector-specific things, the Public Finance team will come in. So I'm going to hand over to Wendy and the team, and then I'll come in.
Yeah, Chair, we can't hear.
Yeah.
We can't hear the presenter, Chair.
I am catching it a little bit myself, so I can hear, and you've got to listen almost attentively. But honestly, is there another way we can connect from National Treasury's point of view?
So Chair, I'm going to hand over to the team, and let me see if I can connect differently while they're doing that.
Okay, let's hear from another member. Let's hear from another member of the team. Let them speak, and then we can confirm whether we can hear them.
Good morning. Do I sound a bit better than Ulrika Bridget?
Oh, Wendy, you have rescued National Treasury. You really have. Wendy, you can proceed, and congratulations on your new role. You can proceed.
Thank you so much. What I'll do is we already brainstormed amongst ourselves who will deal with what questions. And I'll take on some of the health questions and also the local government questions. And then Ulrika and her team will take on the questions with regard to education. But if she cannot join back, I'll also deal with that. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you very much for the very insightful contributions made. I mean, one of the key points that's been made is that it's not just about allocations, it's also how the money is spent. And a lot of attention in the presentations were on that, that there's a lot of fat that can be dealt with. One of the things mentioned were ghost workers, and National Treasury is working with the provincial treasuries, and we're looking at using electronic means and new technology to facilitate that process. A number of studies have already been done in a number of provinces, and a number of ghost workers have been identified. But it should basically be an ongoing exercise, and the focus should be also on controls to ensure that we do not sit with ghost workers. Particularly the focus should be on departments that's got high employment, and that will include the education and health departments. So that's something that the National Treasury fully endorse, and it's something that we're very willing to take forward. And like I said, we will do it in collaboration with the provincial treasuries. Then a concern was raised about the underspending on conditional grants, particularly in the provincial space. And what is actually quite important, if you compare local government conditional grant spending against provincial conditional grant spending, the provincial conditional grant spending is actually quite good. It generally exceeds 95% and above. But that means there's still a 5% that's going lost, and it's something that we do need to focus on and give attention to. But maybe just to alert the committee as well, what is important here is also to focus on the quality spent. We do know that, procurement in infrastructure is quite problematic, and National Treasury has also got various initiatives to assist provinces in this regard. We've got a comprehensive data set, and for example, some expenditure reviews have also been done to look at benchmarking, what should be the ideal costs, for example, to build a school or a clinic. So those things are very important. Again, the focus is on quality of spending rather than just on the quantity of the spending. And then with regard to the USAID funding, it is a very, concerning matter, and it has been raised. National Treasury is looking at the matter, and we were waiting, and it was indicated in previous meetings, we're waiting for the information from the Department of Health. And it's got implications both for the National Department of Health. For example, USAID also funded various research initiatives, and it's also got an impact on individual provinces. And we did receive the costing from the Department of Health, and we're currently busy looking at that matter and using the provisions in the Public Finance Management Act to see if we can't advance the money to the provinces concerned, and then do that before the adjustments budget. And we'll keep the committee, abreast of developments. And it's important to note it is just the USAID funding, that's donor funding, that's been withdrawn. The other donor funding from other countries are still intact. So it's just to compensate the provinces that received USAID funding, and it will be in line with the USAID funding that they received. So there could be instances where certain provinces did not receive USAID funding, so they will not be receiving a top-up. So we are currently verifying the numbers and seeing what we can do in that regard. And like I indicated, we do not want to wait for, or we do not have to wait for the adjustments budget to do that. So that will give some relief, to the provinces impacted. Again, the issue about the youth employment program, I'm glad to hear, and we support the president's view that it's a flagship program, just like youth employment indicated. And unfortunately, the fiscus is constrained, but all attempts have been made in the budget process to fund it as far as we can. So we do agree that it's just a initiative within a broader set of initiatives to deal with youth employment. The private sector definitely need to play a role there as well. Then with regard to the informal settlements, Ulrika will deal with that, but if she does not come back, I'll deal with that. Then with regard to the TB issue, and fully agree that TB is, concerning issue, but maybe just to point out, if you look at the Division of Revenue bill, and you specifically look at pages 167 and 168, it indicates the past performance on TB because it's currently funded in the comprehensive HIV/AIDS component within the district health programs grant. And in 2023-24, 524 million was allocated for this function, and the full amount was spent. And 2.6 million patients were tested for TB using the gene expert method. Another 93.8 thousand people were also tested using the method. And then 94.3% of drug-sensitive TB treatment was successful. And then for drug-resistant ones, it's a bit lower. It's 77.2%, which is concerning. But it's definitely an area of priority, and it is currently receiving funding. So that is important. The presentation by the Rural Health Advocacy Group, again, it's about budget prioritization. Agreed that it's very concerning that some of the statistics that's been given, and particularly, things like diabetes that can be prevented and can also be properly treated. It is ensuring that those functions are properly funded. And maybe just a point to add what I can say there. What the National Treasury does together with the national departments such as the National Department of Health, the National Department of Basic Education, we do what we call benchmarking exercises where the national departments together with the National Treasury interrogates the budgets that the provincial treasuries produce. We indicate to them where we pick up gaps and areas of underfunding. And then look how we can deal with that and ask them to adjust the allocations to ensure that it's properly funded. Definitely what is important there is to ensure that those areas are properly funded. And what we can do from our side is also to share the presentation that the Rural Health Advocacy Group made to the National Department of Health so that they can also take it up with their provincial counterparts. Then just a last point that I want to make in terms of health is, and the concern about, the rural health, in terms rural health versus urban health. And maybe just to indicate, if you look at the provincial equitable share formula, and in particular the health component, a few years ago it was amended to specifically have components in the formula to acknowledge that the provision of health is more expensive in rural areas than in urban areas due to long distances and the like. So the formula has the distances to a clinic, for example, so that, the higher cost of providing health in rural areas are acknowledged. Let's see if Ulrika is back. And if not, then I'll continue. Ulrika?
Thank you, Wendy. I'm hoping that, Chairperson, you are able to hear me now.
Ulrika, you sound, I tell you what the problem is. You sound technically like your every word is buffering. It's saying it's coming across twice. Hello, now you're on mute. You are on mute, Ulrika.
Chair, I'm hoping that this is better. I've
Much
switched devices
better.
completely.
Thank you.
But
Yeah.
I'm
If you
afraid
can-
I'm not going to able to put I'm struggling to put my camera on. So Chair, I'm gonna also, since Wendy's answered on mostly provincial health, I'm just checking, Wendy, if you have anything that you'd want to add in relation to the inputs made by COSATU around local government, and thereafter we will go straight into the education inputs from Spencer.
Thank you. Definitely, I would like to add a bit on the local government issue. Thanks, Ulrike, for pointing that out. In terms of local government and the performance issue, it's definitely an area of concern, and we suggested to the Select Committee on Appropriations that maybe what we need is a separate session on local government to take the committee through all the issues in terms of local government, because it really needs a day discussion or at least a morning's discussion. And maybe the suggestion should be that it can be a joint session. But maybe just to indicate, government is fully aware, or national government is fully aware of all the challenges faced by local government. And often it's just thrown as a funding challenge. Unfortunately, it's much complicated than that. It's often governance challenges and also capacity challenges that's also causing some of these issues. And there's currently a number of work underway that is important, and some of the policy work that we can focus on is the review of the local government white paper. It's led by the Department of Cooperative Governance, but we as National Treasury are playing a key role also with regard to the finance and infrastructure chapter that will come out in this regard. National Treasury is also doing work on the local government fiscal framework to look at all funding issues and some of the challenges mentioned in terms of the ability to raise own revenues, what is caused by inefficiencies and what is caused by real lack of ability to collect, for example, and the like. So it's definitely an issue on the radar screen. The monitoring system has been improved. We know that a number of interventions are underway in local government, sometimes with success, sometimes with less success. So it's definitely an area of key concern for government, and it is requires streamlined, coordinated support from all stakeholders to make a difference. Thanks.
Thanks, Wendy. Spencer, please go ahead.
Thanks, Ulrika. Good morning, Honourable Chairperson and Honourable members and colleagues. So I'm going to take the questions related to education, and I'll start with the ones from section 27. Just to talk a little bit about, firstly, the school infrastructure backlogs grant. Yes, the reductions that you see there is because it's being absorbed in the EIG, so the money is not lost to the sector or to infrastructure. It's just in the education infrastructure grant, which goes directly to provinces, and they will now take responsibility for addressing the backlogs. The money from the backlogs grant will be earmarked in the education infrastructure grant for backlogs. So provinces won't use it for other things. They will continue to address the backlogs that remain with those funds. On the school nutrition program and the fuel levy, the possible inflationary pressures that may bring. Of course, that is possible, and we'll keep an eye on that. But of course, there are also occasions where the fuel price goes down, and then the programs like the school nutrition program will score because the fuel price is lower. But of course, we will keep an eye on the impact of the fuel levy in particular on programs like the school nutrition program. We'll also consider, I think, indexing the school nutrition program to food inflation going forward. We have made adjustments for that purpose in the past, but indexing it to that metric may be something that will be quite useful going forward. So certainly something we'll consider. The point about the learner-teacher support material allocations, I think the point made was that those allocations are below. There's not room for growth there, really. Just to point out that those are provincial choices. Provinces decide how much to allocate to things like learner-teacher support material, and it's affected by how well schools and provinces recover or retrieve books that they gave out in the year. And so books don't all need to be replaced all the time. And therefore you see those allocations going up and down. Some years it will be higher than others because more books are needed in those years than in other years. But it is, as Wendy also pointed out in the benchmark exercise, this is a particular allocation that we interrogate with provinces quite vigorously because of its importance in the delivery of education more broadly. Then on to the grade R issue with that Equal Education Law Centre raised. The Honourable Chair already spoke a little bit about legislative mandates and how some legislation may be passed already by the legislature and issues related to the linking of that and the budget. So I won't get into that. But just to say that we obviously are aware that there's a change in the grade R environment now with the Bala Act having been passed, but that there is a considerable allocation, is over 21 billion allocated over the MTF for grade R in all provinces from their provincial equitable share. There's an allocation for, which I've just spoken about now, for workbooks and learner-teacher support material. That is also over 20 billion rand. Yes, that goes for, it's now from grade R up to grade 12, but there's that amount of money there. And as I said, provinces decide how to prioritize that. So if there's a new influx of grade R children, you'd expect that more of that money will go there because there would be a need. There isn't books from last year to recover, for example. So some of that 20.6 billion or more of that you'd expect to go to grade R. And then there's for infrastructure, school infrastructure, the infrastructure grants are not exclusively for other grades. They're for school infrastructure in general, and again, where there's a need, you expect that 51 billion that's set aside for infrastructure will tend to go towards where the need is greatest, and if that is to accommodate the increasing grade R learner numbers, then that's where it should go. Any further additions required will need to be considered in the budgets going forward. But that's what there is in the budget already, and it is there accommodating almost 80% of learners who qualify for grade R. Honourable Chairperson, you mentioned the role of the private sector here, and so it's more in some provinces than others, but we do know that many grade R learners also go to ECD centres outside of government. Some of them get a subsidy, but some of them don't get a subsidy and are in effect independent similar to independent schools providing grade R. But yes, this is something that needs to be addressed and will get attention, as I said, and be considered in the next budgets going forward. Okay, so that's the issue of grade R. Wendy spoke about the youth capital input on the youth programs, youth employment programs, but just one point to make there. They make a proposal or recommendation that the UIF money should be added to the provincial equitable share. But just to point out that the UIF Act doesn't allow the UIF to transfer money to provinces or to departments. Their money is not to be used in that way. And so this obviously would be the preferred route, as the previous teacher education assistance programs were funded in that way. But the UIF Act doesn't allow that, unfortunately. And then just a last point on one of COSATU's proposals, which was to get the DFIs, CETAs, and NSF to take over the cost of some of the public employment and skills training programs. So we know that the CETAs and the NSF in particular have a particular mandate around skills development and skills training. And so they will continue to do that. We need to beef up that role and that responsibility of those entities. But just in the broader public employment program related issues, that of course will be considered as part of the broader active labor market programs that the Treasury is reviewing at the moment. But just to say that in general, the CETAs and NSF have a specific mandate, which is around skills development. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So there's only one more outstanding issue that we would, or two that I think we need to address. The first would be the concern raised by COSATU on the funding cuts on the informal settlements upgrading grant. I mean, this is comes from the 2024 budget, where the Department of Human Settlements chose to reprioritize funding to other human settlements programs outside of the informal settlements upgrading program. And then the second is just to linked to the active labor market work that is ongoing in the Treasury, is to Youth Capital's recommendations. And yes, we recognize, and I mean, this is why the public infrastructure program is so important, because as we had published in the 2024 MTBPS, that the jobs, so for every R1 million spent on construction, we are able to create 3 jobs for people with at least a matric certificate, compared to, for example, in mining, where it would only be 1 job. So we recognize that, and we recognize the importance of a public sector infrastructure program in relation to construction and job creation. The last point also related to the youth recommendations on releasing the LNP review. Once that review is done, I mean, we would take this forward and highlight to the Minister of Finance that this was a recommendation that came out of the public hearings, and then we would ask him and leave it up to him to make the decision on how we publish that. Hopefully, we will take the same approach that we have taken with all the other spending reviews that we have published. Chair, that is it from us. Thank you very much. I'm slightly mortified. I did not want to be introduced to this committee in this way by the fact that I have some connectivity problems, but I'm hoping that I was audible. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. May I request, especially for some of these, the committee will work through its own report, at least certainly notwithstanding the fact that the committee will respond to each of the submissions that have been made. May I request that if Treasury, given the inputs that have been made, if you could just put a summary note of your response that you could furnish to the committee, I would deeply appreciate that, Ulrike. Is that possible?
Yes, Chair, we are happy to do that. If you would like to let us know timelines on when you would expect something like that from us.
I would expect it certainly by next week, Thursday, if that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we will do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Honorable Waitlin, let me allow you now, if you can make your input. You said.
Thank you, Chair. I think they touched slightly on it. It's just two matters I think is important for all the presenters this morning to realize that the two things the Minister has done and committed on is the one is the complete expenditure review for this year. I think it's important that we just note that as a committee to the presenters, that they can be aware that there is a complete expenditure review conversation happening for this financial year. The second thing is the SRD grants conversation vis-a-vis the unemployment model is also a commitment that was made by the Minister this year. So this is something that we will be following up on as a committee, and obviously we understand that the youth unemployment conversation is very important, and that we will be tracking that as well. It's also important just to say that the Minister of Public Works have already started with tours around the country around how the EPWP is implemented, and that we will also be holding while looking at that in the next year, what will unfold out of that conversations with communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Waitlin. I didn't catch all of that, so there were just some connection difficulties. But let me ask honorable members and all the presenters and presentations. Lawmaking in and of itself requires public consultation, and I think perhaps in 3 versions of the budget, we've certainly had multiple presentations being done, and I want to thank everybody for their commitment to the process. And certainly as a committee, one of the more historic works that we've done was also being able to do some of the hearings that took place on site in Polokwane. And so for the next iteration of the budget, we'll certainly be considering a different province to be able to do that. Naturally, when you have presentation in this format that are online, it helps give access to more people. But what we cannot deny South Africans is that it denies access to other people who are without data, or certainly not without by connectivity. I don't just mean internet connectivity, but just the public knowledge to be able to make their submissions. So it's not lost on me as chair of this committee that if we really want to deepen public consultation, we need to make it such that it's not only organizations that are formalized, but also when we talk about housing, I want to hear from shack dwellers. When we talk about, I heard the presentation about rural health, and I want to assure you that we'll certainly be going to other rural provinces to get more deeper insights into some of these issues. I think it's important as South Africans that the budget becomes a tool that people hear from broadly in the country. So let me thank everybody and their presentation. I want to thank National Treasury for being here. Just by way of announcements to members of the committee, next week we have 2 sessions that have been put on a virtual platform, both on Tuesday and Wednesday. Those applications have been done, so those links will come through. I have been liaising with members of the committee regarding our connection in terms of being able to put together, to finalize and consult and consider our report. I've requested that that meeting be a physical meeting, but given the fact that also Parliament isn't sitting next week in terms of its own formal sittings, it's committee week, that in essence we would be able to put that session on Monday the 23rd. So I want to ask members just to set that day aside. We are busy working with the application. Final communique will be sent to members in this regard, but I'd like for us to meet in person, given that that week there'll be a consideration of our report. Parliament will be sitting. It means members don't have to travel into Cape Town next week, but you can certainly set that side of the week of the 23rd for us to meet physically on the Monday and then proceed with the rest of the parliamentary program. But further communication in this regard will be sent to honorable members. I am most grateful for your input. Unless there are any other things from Mashile, I would like to declare this meeting closed. Mashile, is there anything from your side?
No, Chair, thank you so much. I don't have anything to announce. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Much appreciated, honorable members and presenters. The meeting is now officially closed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Have a good weekend.
Same to you all.